What a shameful state of affairs we find ourselves in. What a shameful state of affairs. One of the most important industries in this country, the construction industry, which provides the infrastructure all Australians need, the roads, rail, schools, hospitals, that is responsible for many projects that build the houses that Australians need, the middle of a chronic housing shortage, and we have a union, the CFMEU, dominating the industrial relations landscape, which is just beyond the pale, And the costs of all that public infrastructure is 30%, 40%, goodness knows what percent more because of the CFMEU and the way it conducts itself. And everyone in this parliament knows this has been going on for years and years and years, and yet it's been allowed to persist until now we reach this stage. What a shameful state of affairs, which all Australians are paying for. I'd like to congratulate the Australian Financial Review, The Age, Sydney Morning Herald and 60 Minutes for the investigation they conducted into the unlawful practices of the CFMEU. And I want to read from a particular article that was prepared as part of that investigation in relation to a young Indigenous Melbourne man by the name of Ben Nash, who took his own life. After attending a construction site, turned up to work at a construction site, came home to his mother and took his own life that night. So I'm going to read from this article, and I'd like to specifically acknowledge Ms Tammy Parker, the mother of that young man, for her courage in terms of speaking out. When Indigenous Melbourne man Ben Nash left for work on the morning of January 24, a day before his 19th birthday, all his mother Tammy knew was that her son was heading to a job he loved. He was drawn to civil construction, she says of Ben. She said he'd overcome mental health issues to throw himself not only into footy, but his dream of building a career in construction. An Indigenous construction firm, Marda Dandy, had not only offered Ben a job, but gave him what Tammy described as a chance to just embrace his Indigenous heritage. Ben loved it. He couldn't have loved it any more. But ever since he skipped out the door that January morning, Tammy's days have been marked with discoveries about all that she didn't know and wouldn't yet find out. She didn't know that the construction industry her son was entering was infested with underworld figures and cronyism, fuelled by crooked businesses and certain CFMEU officials who formed an unholy alliance to control who works and who doesn't on major projects. She was unaware that the Indigenous company that had given her son his first start, and how wonderful is that we had an Indigenous company in the construction industry, providing opportunities for people like Ben. She was unaware that that company had been targeted by the CFMEU. Nor did she know that a union organiser had many months earlier threatened to bash the founder of that company, a gentleman called Mr Denny Miller. A CFMEU official had threatened to bash Miller, along with another of Ben's bosses, labelling the pair dogs. Tammy had no idea that a second senior union official had warned her son's bosses that without CFMEU backing, they would never access any sites funded by the Labor government. She also wasn't expecting Ben to arrive home early from work distraught that same January day. So just picture this, the mother of this son, who left so excited for the start of his work day. He then comes home and he tells his mum that had been bullied and humiliated on a building site because the CFMEU was angry, because he'd previously been employed by that Indigenous construction firm, Marda Dandy. There's no compassion, there's no empathy, there's anger. Tammy didn't know that the next morning When she was meant to be making him a birthday brekkie, she would instead find him in his bed, his lips blue and skin cold. It's difficult to read. It will ultimately be up to a coroner to formally determine the cause of Ben's death. But Tammy is now demanding action against those behind the culture of fear and intimidation the CFMEU, she believes, cost her son his life. This is not a politician's words. This is the words of a mother who lost her son to suicide after he returned home from what was meant to be a day's productive work on a construction site here in Australia. This is her words. Tammy believes Ben's treatment at work tipped him over the edge. Asked who she blames for his death, Tammy utters 5 letters: CFMEU. She says, her words, according to Ben, he was pulled aside by an unnamed CFMEU representative and told that nobody that worked for Marta Dandy would ever be welcome on site again. He was told to expletive off. He just wanted to work. He rang his employer to try and sort something out, and CFMEU wouldn't listen to him. They didn't offer any help. They locked him in a shed for 3 or 4 hours. Just a young boy with mental health issues. It's hard for me to read this. What must it be like for the mother? Nash's death and his mother's determination to make something good of it gives a human face, that of the ordinary suburban Australian worker, to an unfolding catalogue of construction union badness. The CFMEU denies responsibility for the death. Over the weekend, the AFR and 60 Minutes also published covert video of the union official threatening to bash the 2 owners of Nash's company and an industry fixer caught in a covert sting who claimed to be able to bribe CFMEU officials in order to parachute corrupt companies onto the Victorian and federal government funding Big Build and force non-preferred companies off sites. Tammy says Ben's last day alive stands in stark contrast to his earlier time working for Marty Dandy, a fledgling Indigenous construction firm started by Denny Miller. According to Miller's LinkedIn profile, Marta Dandy's vision, and what a noble vision this is, just listen to this, was to place Indigenous men and women into long-term sustainable jobs by equipping them with new skills and a sense of pride and purpose. But the founder of that company, Denny Miller, declined to be interviewed with friends, saying he's had his own mental health problems after the firm's collapse. For Ben, Tammy says Marta Dandy was a perfect fit. They were terrific. Employee welfare is really important to them. I'd be ringing him or messaging him, "Are you coming home for dinner?" Goes on. Despite initially securing CFMEU and Australian Workers' Union support, the former, the CFMEU, turned on the company. The change in attitude is made clear in covert footage of 2 senior construction union officials filmed in March 2022 on a publicly funded Big Build project. The film records a senior CFMEU official repeatedly threatening to violently bash Miller, the Indigenous man who started that company with that great vision, telling him, quote, "Expletive and you expletive, and you know it, don't expletive with me. I will expletive take your soul and I'll rip your expletive head off. Don't expletive with me, expletive. Expletive you, you're an expletive dog." In what world's that acceptable? The covert video also captures a second high-ranking CFMEU official warning that any firms without CFMEU backing in the form of a CFMEU-endorsed enterprise bargaining agreement would struggle to win work on any major civil sites due to the construction union's control of the Labor government. To quote from the CFMEU official, "We've got them all, and news won't be coming in with our companies." End quote. It was only in January, the day Ben arrived home early, utterly distraught, that Tammy learned of the extent of acrimony between the CFMEU and Marta Dandy. He told her he had been bullied by an unnamed CFMEU representative in order to sit in a shed for hours because, even though he was working for a new company, he'd worn a Marta Dandy T-shirt. He wore a T-shirt. His mum says he was angry and stressed, and just not himself. He was worried, He'd been told that he wasn't welcome on site because of the T-shirt that he had on. T-shirt. He told his mum he'd been belittled, yelled at, sworn at and ignored. He said, "I feel sorry for anybody that has ever worked for Denny, because anybody that has ever worked for Marta will never get a job on a CFMEU site ever again," Temi said. Temi believed Ben's treatment made him fear for his future in a career he had only started. He was worried about his new job. He was 18 years old, first day on site, no other workers there that he knew, no support. So consider his vulnerability. Consider the vulnerability of this young man. Who was there on that work site reaching out to support him? Put in a shed, 3 or 4 hours. His mum says, "I thought that's what unions were supposed to do, look after their employees." End quote. For Tammy, what happened next is a blur. I asked him if he was okay, and he said, "Mum, I just need to sleep. I just need to sleep. I just need this to stop." So he went to bed, and I checked up on him at about midnight to make sure he was okay, and he was fine. But when Ben didn't walk out to the kitchen for breakfast, Tammy checked on her son again. He was cold, his lips were blue, he was clearly dead. His girlfriend was hysterical. Obviously we all were. And then it was just calling 000. He was gone. There was nothing we could do. Next came the most unbelievable pain. I just sat outside. The ambos came and the fireys came, police come and detectives come, because Ben was so young and an unexpected death. Tammy hopes the coroner will get to the bottom of her son's death. Tammy says CFMEU officials visited her and tried to downplay the role of workplace intimidation in Ben's death. But Tammy isn't buying it. Tammy isn't buying it. Where was the duty of care for my son? Why was he locked in a shed for so long? Why didn't they tell him to turn his shirt inside out? They didn't want him there. They didn't want him on site. They didn't want him there purely because he was wearing the Marta Dandy shirt. Kids can't go to work and end up dead the next day. No family needs to go through this. So, Madam Acting Deputy President, this issue has a human face, it has a human cost, and there are families across Australia who are suffering. Their fathers, their brothers, their sons, their sisters, suffering because of the state of our construction work sites. Action is required, and the Coalition has put forward 20 sensible amendments to the legislation which has been put forward by the Labor government. And in considering those amendments, I call upon the Labor government to consider those words of Miss Tammy Parker, who lost her son after he arrived home distraught from one day on a construction work site in our beautiful country of Australia.